outside on the front lawn tending to a small flower garden. She was visibly upset about her flower's condition. She was observing a black film on the stems and leaves, then trying to wipe this black substance away while running hose water on it. But it was too greasy and the water wasn't washing it away. The front door opened and Tommy appeared behind his mother. "Mom, there's a phone call for you."
The site of the home re-emerges throughout the creative works of David Lynch, as a spatialised vessel for the anxieties of the self, and as a material rendering of the frighteningly thin boundaries between individual security and the pitch-black horror of the outer unknown. Lynch's representations of the home as an opaque, two-dimensional obstruction, or as a broad yet hollow set, are complexly pluralistic and therefore never stable. In affinity with the surrealists of the early 20th century, Lynch's detorment of the domestic realm revels in the convulsive beauty of an otherwise banished darkness lurking beneath the manicured American suburbs, and reaches deep into the landscape of the saccharine, plush front lawn as a breeding ground for the erotic, abhorrent, and often incestuous psychological torments which unsettle the very foundation of the nuclear family. In the so-called shelter of the household framework, Lynch displaces and maligns domestic iconography, defamiliarises the self as a primarily undisciplined stranger, and spatialises psychological zones through the drawing of a recurrent, yet never certain attention to the fragile liminality of the domestic threshold. In her article on Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, Sage Walton writes, "By way of mood, Lynch will often disrupt our normal visual and spatial coordinates. In these moments, the expressivity of light, sound, colour, music, rhythm, and audiovisual texture is key." This sequence, selected from a Lynch-directed episode of the second season of Twin Peaks, illustrates how David Lynch's preoccupation with mood renders the sight of the home uncanny, and reframes the uncharacteristically foreign expanse of the living room a surreal landscape. Wide-angle lenses distort and expand the unhomely space between vacant furniture. A mid-height, tilted camera positions the spectator as a voyeur, yet one too concealed to possibly suit the comfort of a human form. We linger behind an antique turntable as its once tuneful song succumbs to an entirely visceral, dread-filled cyclical absence, the insistent knocking of which evokes the cycles of trauma now unearthed from the descented domestic realm. Throughout his creative body of work, Lynch reframes the constitutive elements of the home. The artist himself claimed, "I saw everything in extreme close-ups," and amongst other things, it is this debasement of the familiar, this opening up of traumatic zones within the macrocosmic everyday, which renders his work surreal. This quality is particularly true of Twin Peaks, which, intended for a domestic audience, politicises the vessel of the television itself as a surreal intruder prone to disassemble the living room from within.
Yes, I'm a new neighbor. I live just down the street.
Ma'am?
I've been going around meeting our new neighbors. I think that it is important to know one's neighbors, to say hello to them. Brutal fucking murder.
This sequence, taken from Inland Empire, highlights the manner in which, via extended time spent with Lynch's characters, within spaces conventionally coded as secure, the logic of guilt finds form in the slow projection of repressed trauma onto an unwelcome figure. Narratively, a structural approach led by dream logic allows for the emergence of the self as other and suggests a single psychological origin point for multiple characters. Here, the figure of the intruder radically undercuts notions of the homely as a precariously constructed realm of sheltered denial. Through the director's slippery use of time, Inland Empire offers the possibility of a specific experience, a simulacrum of the experience David Lynch undergoes as a creator. The critic Anthony Paraskeva extends this notion to Laura Dern's performance, and further still, to the psychology of the character whom she portrays. As in Slow Time, Dern's sense of composure is undercut by Zabriskie's progressively unhinged performance. The living room is undone as a superficial symbol of well-to-do, bourgeois opulence, and laid bare as a surreal landscape of murderous intent. In Twin Peaks, Bob is an intruder manifestation of incestuous homespun horror. In Wild at Heart, a protagonist on the run from home is affronted by the return of the repressed sexual violence it has come to symbolise, through an unsolicited confrontation with the primally vulgar Bobby Peru. More explicitly, the final moments of Lost Highway reveal the home invader who haunts our protagonist from the film's expository scenario to be a doppelganger manifestation of Fred himself, caught in a narrative loop of traumatic villainy. Gilles Deleuze writes that when characters become a witness to their own existence, everything remains real, but between the reality of setting and that of motor action, there is no longer a motor extension established, but rather a dreamlike connection through the intermediary of the sense organs. Through the intimacy of the domestic zone, Lynch spatialises the anxieties of his characters, harnessing a surrealistic approach to character, which allows for an affect-led, uncanny exploration of the shadow self.
Out of the darkness comes this kind of like a strangest dream, because I'd never seen an adult woman naked, and she had beautiful pale white skin, and she was completely naked, and I think her mouth was bloodied.
André Breton, the writer of the Surrealist Manifesto, claimed that the distinction of a surrealist work was its surrealist motive, that it was written as a surrealist text. And thus it may be argued that Lynch's preoccupation with abstraction to excavate trauma from otherwise mundane, superficial, domestic iconography, as well as the fundamental structure of his film's spatial zones, deserves true surrealist appraisal for the manner in which it explicates the repressive function of the familial, and by extension political, frameworks of American society. The home, as a device in Lynch's work, appears not as a place of sanctuary, but as an obscuring vessel prone to withhold evil doings from public view. Passage through the threshold of the home takes on a politically therapeutic sentiment, as the contradictions of its treatment by Lynch facilitate a collective working through and a psychic coming of age. Lynch's interest in the transcendental assigns particular significance to the liminality of twilight, the bittersweet softness of an unfolding psychological zone, or the slow recognition of the self in a stranger, as a bizarrely optimistic, spiritual rite of passage. David Lynch's worlds engage the body through a visceral cocktail of emotional memory. The feelings are real, and thus so is the world. The reframed home becomes a safe space for the spectator to work through their intimately present darkness in immaterial actuality. As Lynch himself writes, a sense of place is so critical in cinema. While many sets are good for a wide shot, in my mind, they should be good enough for close scrutiny, for little details to show. You may not ever really see them at all, but you've got to feel that they're there somehow, to feel that it's a real place, a real world.